Today I'm going to be demonstrating 3 different biochemical tests: the Durham sugar tube test, the methyl red test, and the Voges-Proskaur test. I'll start with the Durham sugar tube test. In the medium, we have phenol red, which is the pH indicator, as well as glucose, because we're testing to see if these bacteria can ferment glucose. And so firstly, I'll label my tubes. They didn't specify which bacteria we're testing, so I just put SC for slant culture, and I also labeled what test I'm doing, Durham sugar. So then I will firstly sterilize my in the micro incinerator, sterilize my inoculating loop and allow it to cool for a minute. I'm going to take the cap off of this tube and then put it in front of the micro incinerator to sterilize the lip. And then I'm going to go in and grab some, and then I'm going to sterilize the lip of the tube again and replace the cap. Then I'm going to take the cap off of my test tube and sterilize the lip in front of the micro incinerator, and then put my bacteria into the medium, and then I will sterilize the lip of the tube again before replacing the cap, and then sterilize my inoculating loop in the micro incinerator again. And then we also need to put the small tube inside of the tube, and so we'll place the small tube inside to see if any gas comes off, and we're assuming that's already sterile, so hopefully that was in a sterile packaging, and we would place it in there with gloved hands or tweezers that were sterile. And then that is going to get incubated at 37 degrees Celsius for 12 to 48 hours. So we'll come back and pretend like it's incubated. The first thing we want to do is look for sediment. For the purposes of this demonstration, we'll say that there was sediment in the tube, so that means that there was growth. If there was no growth, then you would just write NG for no growth, but we have growth, so we're going to move on. And to do the pH test, you will have to compare this color to a tube with the same medium that was uninoculated. So we'll compare it and see if the color has changed. So if the color is red, that means it's a neutral pH. If it's a deep red, that means it's a pH of 8.5 and above. And if it's yellow, then that means it's a pH of 6.9 and below, which would indicate it's acidic. So let's pretend like it's yellow, and that would mean that it is acidic. And then we want to test, so acidic. And then we want to check and see if there's any bubbles inside of the tube. So it looks like there is a gas bubble in there, and that means that the organism has produced gas as a byproduct of the fermentation. So since we know that it produced acid, then we can say yes, this bacteria can ferment glucose. But if it was red, just neutral red, then we couldn't say that. We would say no. Okay, moving on to the methyl red test and the Voges-Proskaur test. Both of these tests use the same medium, which is the MRVP medium, and that contains glucose, peptones, and dipotassium phosphate. So for this test, firstly I will sterilize my inoculating loop in the micro incinerator and then allow it to cool for a minute. And then I'm going to take the cap off of my tube and sterilize the lip of the tube, and then I'll go in and grab some and then I'll sterilize the lip of the tube again and replace the cap. And then I'll take the cap off of this tube, and I will hold it in front of the micro incinerator to sterilize the lip of that tube. And then I'll go in with my loupe and get the bacteria off into the medium, and then I'll sterilize the lip of the tube again and replace the cap, and then at the end sterilize my inoculating loupe in the micro incinerator. And then I would want to label my tube before I incubate it. So I'll just label it again, slant culture, and this is a methyl red test. And then same thing over here. I could also label it before I put anything in there. So I'll label it slant culture, and this is VP for Voges-Proskaur. And then firstly I'll sterilize my loupe and let it cool for a minute, and then take my cap off of my source culture and sterilize the lip of the tube, go inside and grab some bacteria, sterilize the lip of the tube again and replace the cap, and then take the cap off of this tube and put it in front of the micro incinerator and to sterilize that lip. And then I'll go in and get the bacteria off into the broth, and then sterilize the lip of the tube again and replace the cap, and then at the end sterilize my loupe again in the micro incinerator. And both of those will get incubated for 48 to 72 hours at 37 degrees Celsius. Then after that's done incubating, we'll come and check for growth. And again, let's pretend that there's growth in both. And again, if you don't see anything, then you'd write no growth. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we observe growth in both. And then we'll do the VP test first, since it takes a little bit longer. And so I'll be adding 40% potassium hydroxide. So it's out of the reagent cabinet. I'm gonna take the cap off, I'm going to sterilize the lip of the tube, I'm going to add 10 drops of the KOH, sterilize the lip of the tube again, and replace the cap. And then I'm going to incubate this tube for 30 minutes, going back into the incubator every 5 minutes to mix it. So while that's happening, I'll go over to my methyl red test, and I'm going to take the cap off and sterilize the lip of the tube, and then I'm going to add my methyl red, which is our pH indicator for this test, and then sterilize the lip of the tube again and replace the cap. And then you kind of just want to swirl it straight after you add the 20 drops of methyl red, and then we can read the results of this straight away. And so this test indicates whether this bacteria is a mixed acid fermenter. And so if it turns red, that means it's at a pH of 4.4 or lower. And if it turns yellow, that means the pH is 6.2 or higher. And so it turns red, which indicates that the pH is 4.4 or below. So we can say that according to these results, these bacteria are mixed acid fermenters. And then we'll go back to our Voges-Proskaur test, and it will just say, yes, it's been the 30 minutes, and we went back to mix every 5 minutes. And now we can read the results. And the point of this test is to indicate whether the bacteria are butanediol fermenters. And so if acetone is present, it will turn pink to red, and if it does not, that means that they're not butanediol fermenters. And Yeah, we'll just pretend like it didn't turn red and it stayed this color, so they are not butanediol fermenters. And that is the story on these 3 tests. Thanks for watching.